The captains of the Gotei 13 are shining examples of some of Kubo's absolute finest design work, and each member of that upper echelon of the Soul Society has a very distinct design, unique personality, and overall completely individual feel to their identities. But among them all, there is one captain that really does stand out from the rest, particularly where design is concerned, and that is the former captain of the 7th Division, Sajin Komamura. Now, if you were just to take a look at this guy just on a surface level, you would immediately see, actually, this guy is not a human, he is in fact a wolf, he is a beast. And that immediately distinguishes him from the rest of the captains, so that in many ways makes up for perhaps what he lacks in personality. He is quite stoic, he is quite calm and focused and very loyal and dedicated, and he perhaps isn't the most fun character in the Gotei 13, but I really like Komamura. He is actually one of my favourite captains, and I think he gets unfairly overlooked a lot of the time by the fan base. So today's character analysis, as voted by you guys, is going to be Komamura himself. Before we get started on today's analysis for everyone's favourite wolf, man, Shinigami hybrid thing, if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, make sure to hit that button now. If you love Bleach, this is the perfect place for you. Help push me towards 30,000 subs, I would so appreciate your support. Make sure to give the video a thumbs up too if you like the content, because it really helps with the YouTube algorithm. And also don't forget to hit the notification bell as well, just so you get all of my videos in your sub box every week. As I touched upon briefly in the intro, Komamura is one of my favourite captains, and I know that that is not a popular opinion among the Bleach fanbase. It's not that Komamura is necessarily disliked for any particular reason. He is, after all, one of the OG captains, one of the original 13 when Bleach began. But Komamura has faded into the background in many ways because his personality is simply not particularly explosive. You know, when you pair him up with characters like Kenpachi or Hitsugaya or Kyoraku, he kind of does fall into the background a bit, despite his pretty awesome and really, frankly, striking design. And I think in many ways, the fact that he isn't that fun, the fact that he is a bit of a stickler for the rules, for honor, and for the law, he is pretty much like a mini Yamamoto in a sense, in more ways than one. He has kind of been overlooked by a lot of the fan base, but I really enjoy Komamura. I like what he stands for. I like how he is this gargantuan beast, but with a heart of gold. But as we'll get into in this video, I absolutely love how his character arc plays out, for the most part anyway, and how he tells, you know, he has this whole story with Kaname Tousen regarding revenge, and how he eventually succumbs to that revenge himself. It's actually the inverse of the kind of story you would necessarily expect from a series like this. You would expect most of the good guys to at least end up on some kind of a high, but Komamura really does suffer because of his own hypocrisy, basically. That's pretty much what it all comes down to. Kubo himself also doesn't necessarily give Komamura too much time to shine. He has a few battles throughout the series, but he also definitely comes across as one of the weaker captains overall, despite his immense, possibly unmatched physical strength, apart from maybe Kenpachi, of course. But Komamura really doesn't get too many awesome moments, too many cool chances to shine, unlike a lot of captains. But regardless, he is still an effective fighter with a really cool Zanpakuto toe, even if, again, it's pretty limited in range. But for the most part, I like what Kubo did with Komamura. It's just clear that he didn't give him too many chances to shine, as opposed to a lot of the other captains. So, being one of the original captains introduced in the Soul Society arc, Komamura's manga lifespan is pretty long. He actually first appears in chapter 81. This is way back in the Soul Society arc, when civil war is beginning to break out due to the Ryoko invasion and Aizen's death. And then his final appearance in the manga is 612. In a pretty unceremonious writing out of the story, which is a big shame, and obviously we'll get there when we do. Komamura is very much the epitome of a side supporting character. Yes, he's one of the captains in the Gotei 13, but he is never going to take the spotlight away from characters like Byakuya or Kenpachi. They are very much the main characters when it comes to the cast of the Gotei 13 itself. Komamura is very much a side player, and you know what, that's absolutely fine. He still does get some cool moments to shine. His appearance in the Soul Society arc is possibly one of his most iconic of all, where he's wearing the enormous armoured helmet over his face to conceal his wolf identity from the rest of the Soul Society. We know from his past that he's been shunned by people his entire life due to his bestial exterior, and despite his incredible skill at hiding his Reiatsu, he has found it difficult to fit in among, you know, regular Shinigami, until, of course, Yamamoto Genryusai gave him a chance and allowed him to join the Gotei 13, and of course he met a true friend in Kaname Tousen, who of course was blind so he couldn't see Komamura for what he truly was, but that didn't matter between the two of them. They became firm friends in their early days in the Soul Society. In fact, Tousen's fall from grace is a mirror image of Komamura's own future in the Bleach story. Everything about Komamura and his character arc and his development hinges on Tousen and the way the two of them interact throughout this storyline. But Komamura's role, as far as the Soul Society arc goes anyway, is to be a statuesque defender of Soul Society lore. He is very much on the side of the government in this fight, when you have people like Ichigo and eventually Kenpachi breaking the rules and going against the Soul Society because they think something is eating away at the heart of it. Shunsui no Kitake turning against the Sokyoku, turning against the execution. Komamura is very much in the other camp. He is very much with the stalwarts of Soul Society history like Yamamoto and Byakuya and Soifon. Komamura definitely is, you would consider him a villain in this arc, although again, there aren't really any true bad guys in the Soul Society arc apart from characters like Miuri and obviously eventually Aizen. So Komamura fights against the heroes is probably the best thing to say. He is one of the antagonists. And he doesn't really show up until a little way into this arc. He obviously appears in the very first captain's meeting looking very mysterious with his whole helmet get-up going on, but he's later seen properly once Aizen has been killed and he joins Kaname Tousen on the battlefield. Now, Komamura, again, does not do a huge amount in this arc, and he only really starts to come into his own in the final third, when he starts fighting Kenpachi alongside Tousen, in what is actually a pretty good fight, and I would argue, somewhat overlooked. So Kenpachi takes on both Komamura and Tousen after their vice-captains have gone off to fight Ikkaku and Yumichika, and it's a decent fight. Like, we'll get into this a bit more when we get into Komamura's battles, but Komamura himself definitely takes, again, a bit of a backseat in this battle, because this really is Tousen's fight against Kenpachi. They are the two with the major clashing ideals. I've always felt like Komamura sort of feels like a bit of an add-on in this battle, like almost like his heart's not really in it, compared to Tousen, who truly does believe that Kenpachi shouldn't exist so that the peace of the world can remain. Now, Komamura is actually one of the captains to release his Bankai in this first major arc, Kokujo Tengen Mio, and it looks incredible. Like, the cinematic way Kubo can draw this thing means it's always going to look stunning when it shows up, and actually we don't even get to see him use it in this first arc. He uses it properly for the first time in the Arrancar arc, but here he summons it and we're kind of left with that because he's forced to leave the battlefield pretty much immediately. Now, obviously, this is where we do get a pretty major Komamura moment at the very tail end of the Soul Society arc, when he discovers that his good friend Kaname Tousen is actually a traitor and has turned his back on the Soul Society to work with Aizen. And this is a pretty awesome moment. I've always felt like Komamura gets a bit of a raw deal here because he is the captain who is used to showcase Aizen's strength, but it's still pretty awesome. Komamura comes out of nowhere and lands on the Sokyoku Hill where everything's going down, and he has, unfortunately for him, arrived just a tad before pretty much the rest of the entire Gotei 13 gets there. And Komamura's size as well is funny here. It's wildly inconsistent throughout the entire manga. Here, when he appears behind Aizen, he is maybe 3 times the size of Aizen, but later on in the Arrancar arc, when Aizen defeats him again, he's maybe 2 times the size, but perhaps not even that, 1.5. So Komamura's size is quite a funny little thing that fluctuates wildly. At this point as well, Komamura's helmet has been shattered from the fight with Kenpachi, something again I'll talk about a bit more when we actually get to the battle section, but Aizen kind of makes a remark that he hasn't seen Komamura's face in a long time, and we know that because of Komamura's connection to Tousen, he does have some connection to Aizen, having been introduced to him by Tousen when two of them were very, very new to the Soul Society, but I always get the impression that Komamura's animal instincts has meant that he never trusted Aizen completely. There's definitely a hint of suspicion in that flashback. Komamura obviously berates Tousen for what's happened, but he tries to attack Aizen, and Aizen defeats him in one move with Hado number 90, Kurohitsugi, which as an Aizen fan pretty much is one of my favourite Aizen moments in the series, but it definitely sucks for Komamura to get taken down like that by one of the most powerful Kidos in existence, and at only 1/3 of its power as well. But Komamura is actually one hell of a tank, and he basically gets back up again pretty soon afterwards when the rest of the captains have arrived and Aizen, Gin and Tousen are ascending to Wako Mundo, and you get this fantastic moment that really sat with me and resonated with me and stayed in my mind while I was reading the rest of Bleach, because obviously the end of the Soul Society arc is such a huge moment that many of these relationships feel like they're left in stasis until the Fate Karakura Town arc comes along. Because people like Komamura never see Tousen again until the very, well, sort of at the final third of the Urankar arc. So many of these relationships are left to fester until you finally get there. And for so long, I was waiting for the confrontation between these old friends once again. And I just love how Komamura punches the ground to push himself back up again. And he's like, Tousen, what about justice? What about your idea of justice? Is this what you call justice? Because obviously he can't understand Tousen's worldview. And again, that's a huge point of Komamura's character, is trying to understand his friend's way of thinking. And obviously Tousen turns around and tells him, the path I follow is justice. And, he's essentially being a massive hypocrite about the path of least bloodshed is justice, but Aizen's plan is evil, and, people are going to die if Aizen gets away with what he wants. Can't For Your Own World, I did just put out a video about that, briefly talking about the Tousen stuff in there, but we know a bit more about Tousen's mindset now. But it is fascinating, and it is also kind of heartbreaking to see Komamura truly unable to fathom what the hell's going on with Tousen, why he is leaving, why he is doing what he is doing, why he's chosen this path, especially when Komamura saw his friend as being so pure, especially when they first met each other back in their pre-academy days, before when Komamura felt like an outcast, Tousen was there for him. But their relationship is one of the best in the series as far as I'm concerned, and we'll get there in the relationship section, but I love the Komamura and Tousen relationship that is a real thread that permeates throughout the final part of the Urankar arc, especially when they meet again. And I think the end of the Soul Society arc was a really cool moment for Komamura, and it was one of those moments that really stuck with me, particularly in the aftermath of Aizen's escape. So Komamura basically gets to his feet, that's actually pretty cool, and he turns down medical assistance from the 4th Division. Obviously there are people who are very injured, but he took a Hardo 90 and he's basically okay. So this guy is an absolute beast. But there's a really nice, quiet moment with Komamura and Hisagi. So Komamura is at the grave of Tousen's friend, and in my opinion, this is the sort of storytelling that we really kind of missed out on a little bit in the 1000-Year Blood War arc, because the 1000-Year Blood War arc is like going at 100% the entire way through. It's a mad arc, and I appreciate that, I like that, but also those moments of quiet are necessary, and we don't really get them too much. But I love this one at the end of the Soul Society arc, where Komamura is at the grave of Tousen's friend Kakyo, and he basically says, what would you have said to stop him? What would you have said to make him come back? And there's this lovely moment where Hisagi arrives, clearly also wanting to ask something similar to Tousen's friend, and the two of them bond. The two of them bond over the fact that Tousen has betrayed them both. And, Hisagi's like, Captain Komamura, do you think Tousen will ever come back? And Komamura's like, he will open his eyes. And I love it. I love that so much. That triad, that relationship between Hisagi, Tousen, and Komamura is fantastic. And the payoff is amazing. I think the payoff is so good in the Urankar arc. It's one of the best things about that arc. I think it's ironic as well, because Komamura and Tousen are not particularly popular characters, but I think Kubo did them both incredibly well in that final battle in Fate Karakura Town, which we'll get to in a sec. But I just love it. I think it's a perfect quiet moment. The two of them on top of that hill vowing to bring Tousen back to the light if they possibly can, and it's just amazingly well done. Komamura is basically not seen again now for absolutely ages. This is one of the things I think I mentioned in my Yoruichi video. So many of these characters, particularly Shinigami, just disappear for ages and ages, because they're not involved in the Urankar arc at all. The characters who don't go to Waco Mundo are basically not seen until the Fate Karakura Town arc, which is so weird to think about. I think that's really weird to think about. I think you see Komamura once during a captain's meeting in the Urankar arc, and then he is not seen again until Aizen invades the Fate Karakura Town. This is when you get to see Komamura use his Bankai for the first time, and he got a lot of flack for this back in the day, because Barragan's faction, the Sparta No. 2 Barragan, has sent faction to fight each member of the Shinigami who are defending one of the 4 pillars that are protecting Karakura Town. And Ikaku loses his battle to Choneng Po because he's got too much pride to release his Bankai. Komamura steps in to save the day, and he got a lot of flack for the fact that it looked like he was struggling against a fraction. Obviously, he lands a pretty awesome punch on Poe, but then Poe returns the favour. Now, in the manga, the fight is a lot quicker than it is in the anime, and basically Komamura just releases his Bankai and kills Poe in one hit, which is actually really cool. And I think he doesn't get enough credit for that. I think a lot of people just looked at the fact that he felt he had to release a Bankai to kill a fraction and thought he was really weak for that. But also remember that both Renji and Hitsugaya used their Bankais to take on Grimjo's fraction. So I don't think it's necessarily out of the question. Komamura does one-shot this guy in his resurrection, so that's pretty cool. I will also say, though, that the anime filler that it adds in for this fight is also pretty badass, because Chonen Po tries to fire a Sero at Komamura, and his Bankai just like grabs it and pushes it back into his mouth. That is really cool. So I always thought that was pretty badass. I love the imagery whenever Komamura arrives and whenever Kokujo Tengen Myo is involved. Kubo loves drawing this guy, I think, and he makes him look so badass. Like when he sheaths his sword again, and Kokujo Tengen Myo obviously follows his movements, so it sheaths his sword at the same time, and you just watch it crumble away behind Komamura. Man, it looks cool. It looks so cool. I wish the Bankai could maybe do a little bit more, because it never does anything else other than hit really hard, but you know, for what it's worth, I love the imagery involved. We get a nice little moment as well, actually, with Komamura and his vice-captain, Iba. Now, Iba suffers from many of the same problems that Komamura does. He's just not shown off very much at all. The 7th Division is definitely possibly the most overlooked division in the entire series, but there's a really nice moment where Iba tries to run away from Chonen Po during that fight with Ikkaku, and then Komamura obviously saves their lives, and he's like, never run, you know, stand behind me and I will always defend you. And Komamura has this running theme throughout the series where he really knows how to revitalize his men, you know, and make them follow him. And I love that. He's clearly got the qualities of a leader, which I enjoy as well. That comes back up again in the 1,000-Year Blood War, which we'll get there later, but I really love the little pep talk he gives Iba. It's really nice actually seeing them have a little bit of a chat, because, you know, the two of them do talk a little bit more than some captains and vice-captains. I mean, Rose never even speaks to Kira on screen. But Komamura and Iba have a couple of little back and forths throughout the series, which is nice. And Iba has immense respect for his captain, which I enjoy as well. After the defeat of Poe, Komamura is pretty much relegated to guard duty. He's just defending the healers who are trying to obviously resuscitate and heal the injured on the Shinigami side. However, once Tousen is free of Jokaku Enjo, the real end game for Komamura in this arc begins, and it is, as I said earlier, fantastic. Like, Komamura and Hisagi versus Tousen is one of my favourite fights in the entire series, I think. I absolutely love the way Komamura comes in to defend Shinji from Tousen in the same way he comes in to defend Tousen from Kenpachi. And, you know, he says, I never thought that I would be defending someone from you. And then Tousen claps back by being like, oh yeah, I always knew it was going to happen. Tousen's attitude in this is interesting, because I always feel like he is being unnecessarily harsh to Komamura, because Tousen is trying to push them away. You know, Tousen is really trying to isolate himself, I guess, from the Shinigami, despite the fact that at least 2 members of the Shinigami are genuine friends to him, and they genuinely care about him, and you really kind of feel for Komamura and Hisagi in this fight, and I think it's masterfully well done. You know, Hisagi obviously arrives by wrapping his Kazashini around Tousen's Zanpakuto toe, and then Komamura's like, should he really be here? I think he's super injured from his fights with the Fraction, and it's a good battle. It's a really, really good battle, and it really challenges Komamura, I think, because Tousen reveals to him the reason he joined the Shinigami, the reason he betrayed the Shinigami was because that he could never live within an organization that allowed the injustice of his friend's murder to, you know, go unpunished. And an organization that does that, and being someone who is happy to live in that world, is evil, according to Tousen anyway. And Komamura says that, you know, our mindsets are incompatible, so I have to defeat you for the sake of the Seirei. Again, showing how similar he is to characters like Yamamoto and even Byakuya. He's very much, like I said earlier, a bastion of Soul Society lore. And it's sad. It is sad that he feels he has to defeat Tousen, because Tousen can never come back to the light at this rate. And he has no choice but to finish him off. So it's a great fight. Tousen obviously goes resurrection. We can talk about it a bit more when the fight section comes up. But Komamura is unfortunately defeated again, which is disappointing, because really, like I said, he does not get much time to shine in the manga as it is. And in fact, his Bankai doesn't get any new abilities, but it does get one critical weakness, which is if the Bankai is injured, so is Komamura. And I remember reading that and being like, cut this guy some slack. But obviously that actually turns out to be a pretty big benefit when the 1,000-Year Blood War arc comes around, which again, we'll get into. But Hisagi comes up behind Tousen and finishes him off without him knowing. It's great. It's so good. And obviously Komamura and Hisagi don't harbour any ill will towards this guy, despite the fact that Tousen betrayed them, despite the fact that he was happy with Aizen murdering all of Karakura Town, again showcasing his hypocrisy. He doesn't want to live within an organisation. His greatest fear is to be assimilated with the Shinigami and become one of them, because that organisation is evil for allowing such injustice to happen. But he's happy with Aizen doing this. So Tousen is very hypocritical. But Komamura says that, from his heart, he knew he was always going to be a true friend to Tousen, because he knew from the moment they first met, from the way Tousen spoke about the world and about the world around them and his view of the world, that he knew that Tousen harboured some hatred for it inside him, and he hoped he could be a true friend to Tousen to maybe show him that there is good in the world and that there is light in the world. And obviously Tousen technically throws that in his face, but now, on his deathbed with their last moments together, Tousen does realise that he was wrong, but also accepts Komamura's friendship as something very real. And I thought it was a fantastic moment. Obviously Tousen cries at Komamura's speech and he's like, thank you, Komamura. It's a brutal fight. It is a brutal fight, because obviously when we know that Komamura is incredibly insecure about the way he looks, and Tousen knows this, and when Tousen gets his sight, one of the first things he says is he turns to Komamura and he says, you are far uglier than I ever imagined. And Komamura's, the look on his face it's not only disappointment, but it's also acceptance of what Tousen has become. And I love that, because Komamura is the bigger man in this fight in every scene. Komamura, he's clearly not happy that Tousen has just said that to him, but at the same time, if Tousen could see himself and see the monster he has become both on the inside and the outside, that the outside is very reflective of the monster on the inside at this point. That's why Komamura doesn't lose his mind or anything, because he's that hurt, but I know that Tousen is not himself right now. And if he could see himself, then he would see just how ugly he has become. So it's a great fight. It's a great fight. And a part of me wishes it was a bit longer, but at the same time, maybe it is the perfect length, to stop it from dragging out too long and getting boring. Because I think, like I said before, the characters are not that popular involved, apart from Hisagi, who is very popular. But I think Kubo did them justice. I think it was really, really well done. I think there's a lot more talking than there is actual fighting, but in my eyes, that's generally a sign that there's some really nice ideological stuff going on in the background here. And I think the Komamura and Tousen's relationship is just incredibly well done. Then Tousen obviously dies. His body just explodes, and Komamura rages at Aizen. Komamura has this real hatred for Aizen, very similar to the way Toshiro feels about Aizen, I would say. And it's obviously because Aizen has some kind of direct poisonous impact on people they know and love. Hitsugaya is obviously Hinamori. And Komamura and Hitsugaya tend to react in very similar ways to Aizen. They both rush him, they both are eager to fight and destroy him, and he generally gets the better of them. Komamura's only interaction with Ichigo in the entire series comes up next, when he basically says that he's grateful to Ichigo for arriving on the battlefield when he did, because he was about to lose himself to that anger and attack Aizen and probably be killed. Which, when you read it now, is a little bit bittersweet, because that's basically what happens anyway. He does try and fight Aizen and gets absolutely wrecked anyway. And it's pretty brutal. Komamura gets taken out of the Arrancar arc, pretty nastily, but it's the same way most of the captains go down, to be fair. Aizen just ticks the names off the list, basically, and kills off everyone. But Komamura's does feel especially brutal, because Aizen rends him in half. When you remember, of course, that the Bankai takes the same damage as Komamura, or vice versa, Komamura's whole body is cut open here, and he loses his hand and everything, and he still tries to fight back. and Aizen cuts him down again. So it's a pretty brutal defeat for Komamura to write him out of this arc. Komamura does have a very brief appearance in the Lost Agent arc. Every captain does, apart from Mayuri, and we get to see his new duds, and he looks pretty cool. He's no longer wearing the massive like gold collar and the gold shoulder pads. He's now going for something a little more subdued. He's got like almost this kind of ruffled look to him. He's got a collar, shoulder pads here again, but they look slightly different, and I like it. I think he looks pretty cool. I'm not sure I like it as much as his original look, but it's pretty cool all the same. And then we get the final arc, the 1,000-Year Blood War arc, and this is definitely the most contentious one for Komamura. He gets really interesting development in this arc, but also he's handled rather strangely. So at the start of the arc, Komamura is obviously there for the captain's meeting, and then he's involved in the first invasion, and he comes up against Sternritter E. Bambietta Basterbine, who attacks the 7th Division. Now, Bambietta obviously steals his Bankai almost immediately. He loses Kokujo Tengen Mio, but he does manage to rile his men up once he realises that Yamamoto is fighting on the front lines. He lets out this animalistic roar, and he's like, get to your feet, we have to keep fighting, and Bambietta herself is shocked by this. But obviously Iba once again has his captain's back, and I like this. I like the camaraderie that the 7th Division often manages to showcase, even if they are not shown all that much. Unfortunately, we know the first invasion does not go well for the Shinigami, and once Yamamoto is killed, Komamura is one of the captains to notice this immediately. And after this, we get possibly one of my favourite scenes in the entire series that I genuinely cannot wait to see animated, and that is a very unorthodox captain's meeting, where they are meeting up in the direct aftermath of the first invasion. Yamamoto is dead, his sword lies in ruins in front of them. Almost all of the captains are injured in some way. Komamura himself has lost an ear. I wonder at what point Bambietta just cut his ear off. I think that's quite funny, but Byakuya's not here, Kenpachi's not here, both of them are near dead. It's very unusual. It's raining outside. And I just love this scene. I love the way the captains interact with each other here. Soifon is like mouthing off to everyone, because obviously she's very upset, but she's causing problems with characters like Kensei, and Komamura just absolutely loses it at her. He's like, you need to be quiet, Soifon, you're not the only one who's upset here, and she freaks out because she gets a bit scared by that. But again, it kind of shows that Komamura is perhaps not the most mature character here. He's definitely, like I said earlier, he has leadership qualities, but this scene in particular, I think, was really supposed to separate the leaders from the followers. Soifon doesn't have leadership potential. She's too young at the moment. She's too immature. She's going off at everyone. Komamura, again, he has some leadership qualities, but he's too angry. He's too quick to anger. And then you get characters like Shunsui, who comes in with the perfect blend of scolding those who are out of line, but also bringing people back up again and saying we have to start fighting again. So I love this scene. I think it's fantastically well done. Then Komamura becomes part of the group of characters who had their Bankai stolen, and each of these characters gets a slightly different story. And I have to say that Komamura's is by far the best. In my opinion, it is by far the most interesting and by far the most well told. So Komamura doesn't have any direct interaction with his Zanpakuto itself, but Kubo does use this time to develop Komamura and showcase his relationships with his own family, and even give us the slightest hint, the slightest tease of a backstory for Komamura. So Komamura ends up finding his grandfather, of all people, and we get to find out that Komamura is actually from the Beast clan, which is very interesting. And Komamura does all this to learn an ability called the humanization technique. Now, the humanization technique is a video in and of itself that I want to talk about, but basically, Komamura is feeling nothing but rage for the death of Yamamoto, the man who took him in, despite the fact that he looked like an outcast, that he looked different. Komamura is just in agony at the fact that Yamamoto gave up his life on the battlefield against the Quincy's, and Komamura has no qualms about doing the same thing. So he ends up fighting his great-grandfather and participating in this ritual that causes him to carve out his own heart to gain the ability to become a human and basically become temporarily immortal. Komamura takes this incredible newfound power of his back to the Seirete, which is now under full-scale invasion by the Vandenreich, and engages Bambietta Basterbine in battle once again. This is, in my opinion, another really strong fight for Komamura. I absolutely love the way it pans out. The human transformation made me audibly gasp when I first saw it. I really couldn't believe it. I should have suspected something, I know, from the fact that he was back to wearing a helmet again. but that reveal that he was now a human was incredible, and I really loved it. And this is what I mean when I say that Komamura has by far the most interesting of all the stories of the captains who lost their Bankais. Byakuya obviously nearly dies, but Hitsugaya and Soifon don't really do all that much, but Komamura gets a brand new subplot dedicated entirely to him, revealing more about his history, revealing a little bit about the mystery surrounding the Beast Clan, and giving Komamura this really powerful, poignant send-off, because unfortunately he does kind of get written out of the story after this fight. So his transformation gives him immense power, and his Bankai takes on essentially a new form, Kokujo Tengen Myo Dangai Jo, and he uses it to absolutely destroy Bambietta. Like, she doesn't really put up a fight because she tries to hit Komamura, and every time she does, his body just reforms and he's completely unkillable in this state. It's unfortunate then that Komamura gets it into his head that he wants to actually take on Yuha himself in this state, but unfortunately, the moment he defeats Bambietta, as though somehow the transformation knows when to end, he loses essentially all of his powers. He reverts from a human into a full-on wolf. Like, he becomes a proper four-legged canine, unlike the sort of bipedal humanoid animal he was before. He is now reduced to an actual animal that doesn't seem to be able to even hold a sword. It's a pretty brutal punishment, but it's actually something really unique for a heroic character like Komamura. You would normally expect a good guy to be able to come out the other side, maybe having learnt his lesson, but in this instance, Komamura is actually really punished for going down the same route he once chastised Tousen for doing. This fall from grace for Komamura is actually really interesting character turn. It is a shame that it writes him out of the story entirely. If I was writing it myself, maybe what I'd have done is allow him to stay as a human for a little bit longer, travel with the rest of them to Varvelt in the final third of this arc, and then try and take on Yuha but revert to a human during the fight with Yuha, and maybe actually get killed, as opposed to being left in this state of suspended animation essentially. Komamura has now become a dog. I don't think he can even talk anymore. It's a really strange character turn, and I remember thinking, what's Kubo going to do with this? And unfortunately, he doesn't really do anything with it. Komamura is just now a dog, and then in the flashback at the end of the series, we see that Iba has taken on the captain duties despite not feeling ready to do so himself. So while the end of Sajin Komamura in the manga is kind of disappointing, it is also really thematically awesome, and a part of me does think that Kubo actually really liked Komamura, despite not giving him too many chances to shine, despite the fan base not necessarily taking to this guy that much. He always makes sure to give Komamura a really awesome entrance into nearly every fight he has, and like I said, he gets by far the most interesting subplot when he loses his Bankai. I love the fact that Komamura's character development stems from his own personal failings. Whereas once he had this heart of gold and he used to be able to espouse wisdom to Tousen and Hisagi and basically say to Tousen, you know, you have abandoned your friends, you've turned your back on them for revenge, that is what I call corruption, not the fact that you've gained hollow powers. And that was a wonderful insight into Komamura's thinking as well. Here, he has done the same thing. Now that Yamamoto is dead, butchered by the Quincy, Komamura has gone on this rampage for revenge to the point where he's ripped out his own heart to achieve absolute power. In that sense, like I said a minute ago, it is a shame that this power is only used to defeat a single Sternritter, and even in that sense, Bambietta is not technically defeated. She comes back as a zombie, although very much not the same person anymore. But Komamura himself is left for dead, essentially, which is really disappointing. I would love to have seen him carry on a bit further, join the others and go up to the palace. And if Yuha had killed him, at least it would have been a definitive end for this character. That could have been the punishment for him trying to pursue revenge, is that he suffers the same fate as Yamamoto. That would have been cool. I'd have been all down for that. But Kubo, I guess, had enough of Komamura and felt like now was a good time to write him out. You do see him one last time in the final chapter he shows up in, which is 612, where Kisuke Urahara has gathered as many Captain-class Shinigami as he can to the headquarters and reveals that Komamura and Iba have declined to come with them and are instead holding off the soldat, it looks like. And Komamura is actually standing on his feet again, but he's still a full-on dog, and you never see him in the manga again after that. I do believe it might be said in Can't Fear Your Own World. I'm not sure if it's Can't Fear Your Own World or not, but in one of the supplementary stories, it is revealed that Komamura survives, and he basically just spends his days hanging around the Squad 7 barracks now, I think, which, you know, is nice. I'd have liked to have seen that at the end of the manga, but it doesn't really matter too much, I suppose. But that is basically it for Komamura as far as his role in the story. I'm not going to go too deep into his battles, as I kind of have already done that now, but I do like the fight against Kenpachi, because when Kenpachi destroys Komamura's helmet, you do get the sense that Komamura is concerned about what Kenpachi might say to him. But Kenpachi reveals his actual, you know, mantra of that he doesn't care who you are, what you look like, what you believe in, as long as you can fight good, he doesn't matter. And I love that Kenpachi's line is, as long as you can fight like a beast, I don't care. And I really like that, because Kenpachi is pure. You know, that's what Komamura believed Tousen was. Tousen obviously is not, he's very conflicted and he is very hypocritical, but Kenpachi himself is actually pure, so I find that kind of interesting. In regards to Komamura's other fights, you know, he has that fight against Poe, which is over very quickly when Komamura one-shots him in the manga. Komamura has a really cool line, and actually, Komamura gets a couple of really badass lines throughout this series. In this fight against Poe, he kills him saying that, yeah, I am nothing more than a meager worm of a man, which is really, really badass. And I always interpreted it as being almost not literal, but Komamura is comparing himself to a human and being like, yeah, I'm not really a man in that sense. But also I think it's perhaps because Tousen was allowed to fall so far underneath Komamura's own, you know, nose. He feels that he's barely worthy of being called a man for having such a failure. And then Komamura's other really badass line, which is genuinely one of my favourite lines in all of Bleach, comes in the fight against Bambietta, where he lands the final blow on her, and he says that as soon as it would be wrong of me not to stake my life on the battlefield that, you know, Genryusai Dono gave his life on. And then the line is, as soon as I stepped foot onto this battlefield, I left my life behind. And that is so badass. Like, even if Komamura is supposed to be this revenge-driven beast at this point, which actually, I just want to touch on very briefly, I know Kubo is trying to, like, punish Komamura, in a sense, for becoming this animal in terms of his desire for revenge, but Komamura himself never really feels any different, I don't think. He still protects Hinamori when he arrives. He still cares, obviously, about his fellow Shinigami. It's more just the act that he actually sought out his grandfather and has ripped his heart out. That's the true symbol of his desire for vengeance. But I just absolutely love that line so much. I think it's so badass, and it basically just it sums up his entire mental state in that one moment. In terms of his character relationships, again, we have already talked about this a lot. His most major relationship is unquestionably Kaname Tousen, another one of the captains, the former captain of the 9th Division. The two of them originally believed that they saw the world in a very similar way, or at least Komamura felt that way. They both are, you know, they both believe themselves to be quite pure beings, both on the side of justice and on the side of law. But the difference is that Komamura has a heart of gold, whereas Tousen's heart is kind of embroiled in darkness, you know, and anger and rage at being let down by the system, so much so that he believes the system to be evil, and Komamura doesn't. And Komamura was taken in by the system, despite being cast out by everyone. Yamamoto, the archetypal, you know, governmental figure, actually gave Komamura a chance. And so to Komamura, the Soul Society is a place of good, despite the darkness within it, and Tousen can't see past the darkness. So they are incompatible in that sense, and that is why they must do battle in the end, and I love that. And like I said earlier, I love the fact that Komamura and Hisagi bond over their shared desire to bring Tousen back to the light. I think that's fantastic. Komamura doesn't actually get too many relationships in Bleach. As I said before, he is one of the captains with generally the least amount to do, so I don't really know how I've talked so much about him. But one of his major relationships is his vice captain, Tetsuzaimon Iba, who originally transferred from the 11th Division and actually has built up a real respect for Komamura, which is interesting because obviously Komamura is very different in many ways to the Kenpachis of Squad 11, so I find it really fascinating. And unfortunately you don't get too much time with these two guys, but they do get a little bit, and I love the moment at the end of Komamura's battle with Bambietta where Iba arrives and he picks up the now animalistic Komamura and he's like, you know, I don't think you did anything wrong as far as I'm concerned. You know, let's go defeat that guy Yuhabuk together. And it's a really nice moment. It's a shame that nothing ever comes of those two again, but Iba taking up the mantle of captain, I wish he'd mentioned Komamura in the epilogue, but I do enjoy their camaraderie and the fact that Iba always has his captain's back, It's just really nice to see. And the last relationship we talk about before I end this behemoth of a video is a bit of a strange one because it's never really showcased on screen. In fact, I don't think these characters share a word on screen, but it's with Genryusai Yamamoto. Now, Yamamoto is the head of the Gotei 13, he's the captain commander, he is this old, very traditional guy who follows the law almost absolutely. Obviously, he changes a bit as time goes on, but at the start of the series, at least, he is, pushing for Rukia's execution. He is an advocate of justice and of the law, and Komamura very much takes after him. He does feel like a mini Yamamoto in many ways. The no-nonsense approach to everything he does, how direct he is. The way Shinji is like, I can't deal with people that are this direct, when he talks about Komamura voicing his intentions to everyone, including the bad guys. That's very Komamura. There's no subtlety to this character. But I like the fact that Yamamoto took a chance on Komamura and gave him a place in the Soul Society despite the way he looked, and Komamura has been able to work his way up to captain level ever since. And Komamura owes Yamamoto an enormous debt, and it's never talked about. It's talked about a little bit, but the two of them never interact really. And obviously when Yamamoto dies, it crushes Komamura and sets him on a irreversible path of vengeance, which again I think is a pretty compelling character arc if it ends a little bit too soon for my liking. But that's it about Sajin Komamura, the former captain of the 7th Division, and as you can see I can talk a long time about this guy. A lot of people don't find him to be that interesting, but he really is one of my favourite captains in the series. I love the way his mind works, the way his personality works, but I most of all love his character journey and his fall from grace, his rise as he strives with Hisagi to bring Tousen back from the darkness, but then he can't help himself but fall down that same chasm after Yamamoto is killed. I think it's really neat what Kuma did with this guy. I just wish he'd been shown off a bit more. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave it a like. And I know it is quite long, so I really appreciate it if you made it right to the end. Let me know in the comments below what your favourite Sajin Komamura moment is in the series. The next video is on Bambietta Bastabine, the Sturmiter E that Komamura actually fights. And then after Bambietta, it is on Neliel. So they'll both be pretty interesting. I'll put out another poll, probably when the Neliel video comes out. That should be easy to keep track of. But until next time, guys, we should catch you later. I'll see you then.